The night was heavy with the scent of rain, and the wind whispered through the thatched roofs of Iluadun, a small village on the edge of the great forest. Deep within the compound of the wealthy farmer, Baba Ade, a baby's cry pierced the silence. Baba Ade's wives exchanged uneasy glances as they looked at the frail child, her skin pale like the moon, her tiny fingers curled as if holding secrets from another world. They had seen this before. For years, Baba Ade and his first wife, Morenike, had lost every child they bore. Each one would live only for a few years before falling ill and dying, only to return, reborn, into the family. "What shall we name her?" one of the midwives asked, her voice uncertain. Morenike swallowed hard. She knew the tradition. Abiku children must be given names that remind them of their past, names that curse them, names that tell them that they are not welcomed. She closed her eyes, then whispered, "Malomo," which means "do not return." The midwives murmured their approval. A strong name, a warning. But deep in her heart, Morenike prayed that this time would be different. The village seer, Baba Fagbemi, was summoned at dawn. He arrived with his bag of cowries, his long beads rattling as he stepped into the hut where Malomo laid. He studied the child for a long time, then he sighed. "She carries the mark of the Abiku," he said gravely. "The spirits of the forest hold her in their grip. If nothing is done, she will leave again." Baba Ade's hands trembled. "What must we do?" he asked. The seer poured his cowries onto the mat, muttering ancient incantations. The shells scattered, forming patterns only he could read. His face darkened. "This one is different," he murmured. "She is powerful. The spirits do not just claim her. She knows them. She walks among them." A cold fear wrapped around Morenike's chest. Baba Fagbemi reached into his pouch and brought out a sharp knife. "We must put a mark on her, a scar deep enough to remind her that she belongs to this world, not to theirs." When it was done, the Ifa priest whispered an incantation over her and rubbed herbs into her wounds. Then he placed a protective amulet around her wrist. "This will bind her to this world," he said. "But beware, the spirits do not let go so easily. They will come for her." That night, as the village slept, the wind picked up again. And in the shadows of the great Iroko tree, beyond the village, unseen eyes watched. Malomo belonged to them, and they were waiting. The nights after Malomo's birth were restless. Her cries did not sound like those of other babies. Sometimes they came as soft whimpers, barely louder than the wind. Other times, they rose in sudden sharp wails that sent chills down the spines of those who heard them. But the strangest thing was how quickly she stopped crying whenever she was alone. If Morenike or other wives left her in the hut. One evening, when Malomo was barely 6 months, Morenike woke up to find her child missing from her mat. Panic gripped her chest. She turned the whole hut upside down, screaming for the other wives. The entire household stirred as they searched frantically. Then they found her. Malomo was sitting outside near the large Iroko tree at the edge of the compound. Her tiny fingers were drawing patterns in the dirt. The wind whispered through the leaves above her, carrying a sound that almost seemed like laughter. Morenike rushed forward, snatching the child into her arms. But as she held Malomo close, she felt something wet against her fingers. It was blood. The mark the Ifa priest had carved into Malomo's foot was bleeding. Yet Malomo did not cry. She only stared at her mother with dark, knowing eyes. Morenike's heart pounded. She ran back to the hut and wrapped Malomo's foot in fresh clothes, praying under her breath. But she did not sleep for the rest of the night. Something was terribly wrong. The following day, Baba Fagbemi was summoned again. The old diviner arrived, his face grave. "The spirits are calling her," he murmured, examining the child's foot. The mark was supposed to keep her bound to this world, but the wound refuses to heal. "The spirits are stronger than we thought," he said. Baba Ade clenched his fists. "Then what must we do?" The diviner shook his head. "We must watch her closely. Do not leave her alone, even for a moment. The spirits will try to take her back." That night, the house was locked and guarded. Baba Ade's best hunters took turns standing watch with their weapons. Every wife and servant stayed close. The lamps kept burning. But just before dawn, a terrible whispering filled the hut. Soft voices, layered on top of each other, speaking words that no one could understand. The flames of the lamps flickered wildly. The air grew heavily thick, suffocating. Then the baby's mat was empty. Malomo was gone. Morenike's scream shattered the silence. The hunters grabbed their weapons and rushed outside, their eyes scanning the compound. Then one of them pointed. There! Malomo was sitting under the Iroko tree again, but this time she was not alone. A dark figure stood beside her. Its form shifted like smoke, and though its face was hidden, its long bony fingers reached towards the child. Malomo giggled, stretching her arms towards it, as if greeting an old friend. The hunters did not wait. They charged forward, raising their weapons. The moment they moved, the figure disappeared. Malomo blinked, looking confused. Then, for the first time in months, she began to cry. The whispers faded into the wind. Baba Fagbemi arrived. Moments later, sweat beading on his forehead. He took one look at Malomo and spoke in a trembling voice. "The spirits are no longer just calling her," he said. "They have come for her." Baba Ade gritted his teeth. "Then we must stop them." The old diviner sighed heavily. Stopping an Abiku is not so simple. She is part of them, and they are also a part of her. Morenike clutched her child tightly. "What are you saying?" The diviner met her gaze. "There is only one way to truly break the cycle. We must go into the forest and find the one who holds her soul." Silence fell over the hut. Everyone knew what that meant. They would have to enter the land of the Abiku. There was no living soul that went there and that had ever returned. The night air was thick with silence as Baba Fagbemi led the way towards the forest of spirits. His staff glowed faintly in the moonlight, its carved symbols shimmering with ancient power. Behind him, Papa Ade walked with his bow slung across his back, a quiver of arrows at his side. Morenike held Malomo tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. She knew the risks. No one entered the sacred forest without consequences. But she would rather face the spirits herself than lose her child again. As they reached the forest's edge, Papa Fagbemi turned to them. "From this moment, we must not speak carelessly," he warned. "The Abiku will try to trick us. They will show us things we fear, things we love. No matter what you see, do not turn back." Morenike nodded, her grip tightening around Malomo. Then, without another word, they stepped into the darkness. After what felt like hours, they reached a massive tree with a hollow trunk. Its bark was pale as bone, and strange symbols were carved into its surface. The wind howled through the branches, carrying voices, laughter, whispers, cries. Baba Fagbemi stepped forward. "This is the gate," he said. "Beyond this tree lies the world of the Abiku." Morenike felt Malomo stir in her arms. The baby opened her eyes and smiled, not like a normal child, but like someone who recognized where they were. Baba Fagbemi drew a line in the dirt with his staff. "Once we cross, we will not be in the land of the living anymore," he said. "If we fail, we may never return." Baba Ade exhaled deeply, adjusting his quiver. Morenike pressed a kiss to Malomo's forehead. Then, without hesitation, they stepped into the hollow trunk of the tree. The darkness swallowed them whole. A dim, eerie glow spread around them as they landed softly on their feet. They were no longer in the forest. They stood in a strange place where the sky was neither night nor day, only an endless grey. There were trees with white leaves stretched in every direction, their roots twisted like the fingers of unseen creatures. The ground beneath them was not earth, but a smooth, pale surface, like polished bone. Baba Fagbemi gripped his staff tightly. "We are here," he whispered. "The land of the Abiku." Morenike held Malomo closer. The child was awake now, her dark eyes shining. And she was smiling. Not an innocent smile of a baby, a knowing smile. Then a gust of wind rushed past them, carrying laughter, high-pitched, playful, but unnatural. Shadows flickered among the trees, moving too fast to follow. Then from behind one of the pale trees, there appeared a group of children. They were thin, almost too thin, their large eyes gleaming with mischief. Their skin was pale like the moon, their hair wild and tangled with leaves. They had faces of young children, but their movements were too smooth, too perfect, too unnatural. A dim, eerie glow spread around them. And one of them, a boy with long arms and hollow cheeks, stepped forward. He smiled, showing small, sharp teeth. "You have come far," he said. His voice echoed as if spoken from distant directions. Morenike's grip on Malomo tightened. Baba Ade reached for his bow. Baba Fagbemi held up his hand. "We come for the child," he said firmly. "She does not belong to you." The boy laughed. The others joined in, their voices rising like the rustling of dry leaves. "Oh, but she does," the boy whispered, stepping forward. "She is one of us. She always has been." He turned to Malomo, tilting his head. "Don't you think so, little sister?" he asked. Malomo giggled. And then she spoke, a clear, soft voice, too clear. "I have missed you." Morenike's breath caught in her throat. Malomo could not talk yet. She stared in horror as her baby smiled at the pale children, as if she remembered them. The boy reached out his long fingers, brushing Malomo's tiny hands. "Come, little sister," he said gently. "You have spent enough time with the living. It is time to return home." Malomo cooed and stretched her hands towards him. "No!" Morenike pulled her back, her heart hammering. "She is my daughter. She belongs to me." The boy frowned, his large eyes darkening. "You do not understand, mother of Malomo." Baba Fagbemi slammed his staff into the ground. "Then make us understand." The boy sighed, stepping back. The other children moved aside, forming a circle. From the shadows, a new figure appeared. A tall woman, draped in flowing white cloth. Her hair was long and wild, and her face looked like Malomo's face. Morenike gasped. Baba Ade took a step back. The woman's voice was soft but powerful. "You call her Malomo, but that is not her name." She turned to the child. "Do you remember my daughter?" Malomo blinked slowly. Then in a voice that was not hers, she whispered, "Yes, I remember." Morenike felt her world spin around her. Baba Fagbemi's face was grave. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman's eyes glowed faintly. "I am Olajumoke. Many years ago, I too was born into the world, but I did not stay. I am one of the first Abiku." She looked at Malomo with a strange sadness. "And this child, she is not just an Abiku." She turned back to Morenike. "She is my daughter, reborn." A heavy silence filled the air. Morenike felt her knees weaken. She shook her head violently. No, it's not true. She is my baby. She is my child. I carried her in my womb." Olajumoke nodded slowly. "And yet, she has walked this path before. She had lived and died over and over again. This is not her first mother. You are not the first to love her." Morenike's eyes burned with tears. "Then how do I break the curse?" she whispered. "How do I keep her?" Olajumoke studied her for a long time. Then she said, "You must make her choose." She gestured to the pale children. "The Abiku do not take her by force. She has always returned to us on her own will. If you want her to stay, you must make her choose to be in your world." Morenike swallowed hard. She looked at Malomo, her precious child, her daughter. And for the first time, she was afraid. She didn't know if Malomo was going to choose to stay or come home with her. Silence filled the eerie land of Abiku. Morenike's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at Malomo. Her child, her own flesh and blood, was sitting comfortably in her arms, yet her small dark eyes were locked onto Olajumoke's own. The ancient Abiku woman who claimed to be her mother from another life. The pale children stood in the wide circle around them, their faces expectant. Morenike fell to her knees, clutching Malomo close. "My child," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You are mine. I carried you. I bore you with pain and joy. You belong to me." Malomo did not blink. Baba Fagbemi watched, with narrowed eyes, gripping his staff. And Baba Ade, his body tensed with fear, clutched his bow. But even he knew this was not a battle to be fought with weapons. The choice was Malomo's own, alone. Olajumoke's voice was gentle. "You cannot force her. She has lived many lives, mother of Malomo. She has known the world of spirits longer than she has known the warmth of your arms. Do you truly believe she will stay?" Morenike's eyes filled with tears. She kissed Malomo's forehead, her hands tightening around her child. "My child, I beg you, stay with me. Let me love you. Let me see you grow." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Malomo shifted in her arms. She turned to the pale-skinned children, her tiny fingers reaching towards them. The boy with the long arms smiled. "Come, little sister." Morenike's heart stopped. She was losing her. Her hands tightened around Malomo. "Please," she sobbed, "do not leave me." And then Malomo looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, something changed in her dark, knowing eyes. A strange wind swept through the land of the Abiku. The pale children whispered among themselves. Malomo blinked. Then slowly, she turned away from the boy, away from Olajumoke. She rested her tiny head against Morenike's chest. And then, in a soft voice, she said, "I want to stay." A deafening silence fell. The boy with long arms staggered back. The pale children gasped. Olajumoke's eyes were closed. Her lips tightened. Malomo had made her choice. She had chosen life. A deep rumbling shook the ground. The trees trembled. The pale children began to fade, their forms turning into wisps of mist. Olajumoke opened her eyes, staring at Malomo with something that looked like sorrow. "This has never happened before," she murmured. "She has always returned to us." Baba Fagbemi slammed his staff into the ground. Then the curse is broken. The air around them shifted. The sky above them cracked, revealing light. The ground beneath them shook violently. The land of Abiku was crumbling. Olajumoke stepped forward, touching Malomo's cheek. One last time. "You have chosen," she whispered. "You may live, this time for as long as the earth allows." Then she was gone. The wind roared, the world tilted. And suddenly, Morenike, Baba Ade, and Baba Fagbemi were falling. Morenike woke up with a sharp gasp. She was lying in the middle of the forest, just beyond the hollow tree. Baba Fagbemi and Baba Ade stared beside her. The night was still, the village was near. And in her arms, Malomo breathed softly, warm and alive. Tears spilled from Morenike's eyes. She hugged her child tightly, rocking her gently. My baby, my child. Baba Fagbemi sat up, rubbing his forehead. He looked at Malomo and then at the tree behind them, which now stood silent and lifeless. The gate is closed, he muttered. The spirits will not take her again. Baba Adi let out a deep, shaky breath. It is over. Morenike clutched Malomo tighter. For the first time in so many lifetimes, an Abiku had chosen to stay. Hey lovelies, thank you so much for watching. Please do well to comment. Let me know your thoughts about the story. Share and subscribe. Till I come your way again. Bye.